Be me anon. 26 years old at the time this happened. Work in IT, nothing glamorous. Mostly help desk stuff and some back-end maintenance for a mid-sized company. Decent enough job, pays rent, leaves me enough in the evenings to have a life. Apartment is nothing special. Split it with a roommate I barely see because our schedules are opposite. Socially, I'm doing okay. Got a small group of friends I've known since school and a couple from work. We hang out on weekends sometimes, go to bars, occasionally someone throws a party. Nothing wild, but it's a life. Dating has been the usual story. Apps, some dates, some that went nowhere, a couple that lasted a few weeks before fizzling out. Nothing serious in a while. I wasn't particularly looking for anything serious at that point, just kind of seeing what happened. And that's the headspace I was in when I met Maya. Not desperate, not bitter, not carrying much baggage, just a regular guy doing regular things. The way we met was completely unremarkable. Mutual friend threw a birthday thing at his apartment, medium-sized gathering, maybe 25 people, mix of different friend groups. I'd been to enough of these that I wasn't expecting anything memorable. Just show up, drink some beers, talk to whoever, head home at a reasonable hour. Maya was there because she knew the birthday guy through some other connection. I don't even remember which one. Some overlap of social circles. We got introduced by the host somewhere in the middle of the party. He said, "Hey, this is so-and-so, you two should talk," and then immediately wandered off to do something else, the way hosts always do. So we were just standing there. And instead of it being awkward, it was actually pretty easy. She had a quick sense of humor, and she was sharp about things. We talked for maybe 40 minutes straight, before realizing we'd been standing in the same spot the whole time. The usual getting-to-know-you conversation, but it moved well. She asked good questions. She actually listened to the answers. I liked her pretty immediately. Asked for her number before I left. She said yes without making it weird. Texted her maybe 3 days later. She replied within the hour. We went out the following week. Coffee first, then she said she was hungry. So we walked somewhere and got food. Ended up staying out for like 4 hours. Second date was a week after that. By the third or fourth time, we were clearly doing the thing where you both know this is becoming something, but neither of you has said it out loud yet. Eventually, one of us said it. I don't even remember exactly how that conversation went. But we became official, or whatever you want to call it. And for a solid stretch of time, it was genuinely good. I want to be clear about that, because I don't want this to sound like I'm rewriting history to make it simpler. There were real stretches where things were easy and warm, and I was glad I'd gone to that party. She was interesting to talk to about almost everything, had strong opinions, and could actually back them up. We had the kind of conversations you want to have with someone you're with. I remember one Sunday we just ended up spending the whole day at her place. No plan, no itinerary, just made breakfast, talked for hours, walked to get coffee, came back and watched something. One of those days that doesn't do anything special, but feels like the relationship is working. She was funny in that dry way where you almost miss it if you're not paying attention. And she remembered things I said, which sounds like a small thing, but it isn't. Like I'd mentioned something in passing, and 2 weeks later she'd bring it back up because she'd been thinking about it. That kind of thing mattered to me. I liked being with her. The feminist stuff came up pretty quickly, which makes sense because it was just a real part of how she saw herself. She mentioned it early on without making it a test or anything. Had some pins on her bag, one of those stickers on her laptop that I clocked but didn't say anything about. Referenced feminist writers or ideas fairly often in conversation. I didn't have a problem with it. I wasn't looking for an ideological debate. I was just getting to know her. She wasn't aggressive about it either. It wasn't like she was waiting to catch me saying something wrong. It came up naturally, the way anyone's values come up when you're spending real time with them. And honestly, for the first few months, it stayed pretty abstract. It was just part of her worldview that she mentioned occasionally. It didn't really touch the day-to-day of us being together. We did normal couple stuff, went out for dinner, cooked at each other's places, saw some movies, went to things on the weekends. She came to a couple of my friends' things and got on well enough with people. I met some of her friends and did the same. It felt like we were building something. I was genuinely into her, and I wasn't trying to hide that. But the thing about something being genuinely good for a while is that when it starts to shift, you don't notice right away. Because you're used to it being good, so you explain away the small things. The first time something sat wrong with me, I didn't even call it that. We were at a party for one of her friends. I didn't know most of the people there. Maya knew basically everyone. She was in her element, moving around and talking and laughing, which was fine. I'm not the kind of person who needs to be glued to their partner all night. But at one point, I was standing with a drink, and I noticed her across the room. She was talking to a guy I didn't know, and the conversation looked easy and close, in a way that made me do a second glance. She was laughing pretty hard at something he said. Touched his arm a couple times during it, stayed in that conversation for a while. I watched it for maybe a minute, and then told myself to stop watching it. Told myself I was being weird. She's at a party full of her friends. Of course she's being warm and easy with people. That's just how she is. Went and talked to someone else. But it was in my head for the rest of the night in that low-level way you can't quite shake. I didn't bring it up then. Thought another day or two would make it feel smaller, and I could just let it go. It didn't really get smaller. Not that I was obsessing over it, just that it stayed there. A couple weeks later, we were out with a group. Bar situation, mix of her friends and a couple of mine. She ran into someone she knew from somewhere, some old connection. They obviously had some history of being friendly. And again, same kind of thing. The conversation pulled her out of the group. It went on for a while. A lot of physical back and forth in how they were talking, leaning toward each other, the contact that comes with that kind of easy familiarity. And I was nearby, not ignoring it, just watching. This time I mentioned it later, kept it as calm as I could manage, said something like, "Hey, I noticed that, and it made me a bit uncomfortable. I just wanted to be honest about it." She said I was reading too much into it. Said she's just a naturally physical person. When she's comfortable around people, it doesn't mean anything. Said she didn't like the word uncomfortable, like I was accusing her of something. I said I wasn't accusing her of anything. I was just telling her how I felt. She said she understood that, but she couldn't change her personality every time I got a feeling about something. And she used the word policed. Said she didn't appreciate being policed. I said I wasn't trying to police anything. I was having a conversation. It ended there without escalating. But the word policed stayed with me. Because I'd said I was uncomfortable, and somehow that had become policing. That's a pretty big jump. Anyway, I let it go. Chalked it up to a communication mismatch. Said okay to myself, maybe I'm too in my head about this stuff. A couple of weeks passed and things were fine. Normal rhythm, nothing uncomfortable. She was her usual self, and so was I. The tension from that conversation dissolved, and I stopped thinking about it. And that would have been fine if it had just stayed that way. But it didn't. She had a work event, the kind of drinks thing companies do occasionally, where it's technically optional, but everyone goes. She wanted me to come and meet some of her colleagues. I said sure. Went along, met a bunch of people I'd heard names for but never put faces to. Nice enough crowd overall. And then there was this one colleague of hers. I'll just call him a colleague. She'd mentioned him before in passing, just as someone she worked closely with. And it was obvious the second I saw them together that they were comfortable with each other in that specific way. Inside references, finishing each other's sentences on certain things, that easy physical stuff again. Hand on her shoulder at one point, her leaning back laughing, that whole thing. And I'm right there. I'm talking to other people, I'm being completely normal on the outside. But internally, I'm doing the thing. Taking note, cross-referencing it with the previous times, building a picture. We went home, and I brought it up. a bit more directly this time, said, "Look, I'm not accusing you of anything, but when I'm standing there and I see that kind of physical ease between you and someone else, it bothers me." Said, "I think it's fair for me to want there to be some visible difference between how you act with me and how you act with other people. That I'm your boyfriend, not just another person in the room." She listened to the whole thing. Then she said she'd actually been thinking about this. Said she'd been reading about how certain behaviors in relationships, specifically men pushing their partners to limit male friendships, is a form of control. Said she wasn't going to let that happen to her. Said her friendships are hers, and she's not going to modify them because of my insecurities. I stood there and tried to process that. I'd said I was bothered by something. I'd asked for some acknowledgement of that, and I'd come out the other end of it as someone attempting to control her and limit her friendships. I said I wasn't asking her to limit anything. I was talking about how I felt watching something. She said feelings aren't automatically valid just because you experience them. That one I didn't have a fast response to. Just kind of stood there for a second. Then I said, okay, went to bed. And I lay there for a while thinking about that sentence. Feelings aren't automatically valid just because you experience them. I thought about where I'd heard that before. That's the kind of thing you say to someone who's having an irrational reaction, who's making something out of nothing. I didn't think I was making something out of nothing, but maybe I was. I tried to be honest with myself about it. Asked myself whether I was being unreasonably jealous, maybe a little. But I also thought about the basic thing underneath it. I'd said something bothers me 3 separate times now, and 3 separate times the response had been some version of, "That's your problem, not mine." Not, "Hey, I hear you, let me think about that." Not, "Okay, I didn't realize it looked that way, I'll be more aware." Just a reframe where I become the person with the issue. I thought about what it would look like if the situation were reversed. If she had said to me, "Hey, I feel uncomfortable when you do this specific thing," I would have just stopped doing it. Not because she owned me or controlled me, just because she mattered to me. And I didn't want her to be uncomfortable. That's not a complicated thing. But that same basic exchange kept going the wrong direction every time I tried it. I didn't sleep great that night, but I got up the next day and kept going. Didn't bring it up again for a while. Just decided to give it room. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe things would naturally settle. Maybe this was just an adjustment period and it would pass. And for a while it did sort of pass. We had a good run after that, a couple months of things being easy. I started to wonder if I'd made it too big in my head. She was good company. We had fun together. There was warmth there. I stopped second-guessing it and just tried to be present in what was actually happening instead of what might happen. And that worked until the night it didn't. There was a party at one of my friend's places. His apartment, decent size, he was having a bunch of people over. I'd known this guy for years. Good friend, reliable person. The invite was broad enough that it included some of my other friends, some people I knew less well, and Maya brought a couple of her friends along too. So it was a mixed group. Maybe 30 people at peak, music on, people spread across the place. One of my coworkers was there. Guy I'd worked with for 2 years. We got along well, had lunch together sometimes. I'd talked about Maya to him before in the way you mention your girlfriend when something relevant comes up. He knew about her in that peripheral way co-workers know about your relationship. I introduced them early in the night, normal thing to do. They said hi, brief exchange, nothing notable. Then the party did what parties do, and everyone dispersed into conversations. I was talking to some people, had a beer, was doing fine. At some point I looked over and Maya and my coworker were talking. Just conversation, standing there with drinks. And I watched it for a second. And then I watched it for a minute. Because it was doing the thing again. The lean in, the laugh, the contact. Not dramatic, not obviously anything. Just that particular quality of ease that I'd been trying to explain to her, and she'd kept telling me I was reading wrong. I finished my beer, started another conversation, told myself I'd deal with it later and not ruin the night. The party went on. I had a reasonable time, talked to people, moved around, did the normal stuff. Maya was doing her thing too. She's good at parties, she knows how to work a room. We'd cross paths occasionally, exchange a few words, but we weren't attached at the hip. We left together at a reasonable hour, walked to the car, and I brought it up. I was calm about it. Said I noticed her, and my coworkers seemed pretty comfortable together, and I wasn't happy about how it looked. That I'd mentioned things like this before, and it kept happening, and I needed her to understand that it wasn't okay with me. She didn't yell. She actually seemed very calm, too. She said she doesn't belong to anyone. Said it clearly, like it was a position she'd arrived at and was now stating. Said she's not a possession, and she refuses to be treated like one. Said my behavior, the repeated mentions of this, the monitoring, the discomfort every time she talked to a man, was textbook possessive behavior. Said she'd been doing a lot of reading and thinking about this. Said she thought I had some really deep-seated toxic ideas about women and what they owe their partners. Said this kind of thing, this need to track and evaluate her interactions with other men, was exactly what she meant when she talked about male toxicity. And she said it all without raising her voice, which almost made it land harder than if she'd been angry, because it sounded like a conclusion, not a feeling. Like she'd thought it through and arrived at this and was presenting it to me. I stood there. I think I waited for a but, or a softening, or anything that would make it less absolute. Nothing came. I said okay. She looked at me for a second, a little uncertain maybe, like she'd expected pushback. I said, "You're right, I'm sorry." And she relaxed. She put her hand on my arm briefly and said she was glad we talked about it. Said she hoped I'd think about what she'd said. We drove home. She stayed at my place that night, and I lay there in the dark next to her and went through it very carefully in my head. Not dramatically, not making it into more than it was, just thinking. I thought about the first time I'd said something bothered me, and the second time, and the third. I thought about what she'd said tonight. Possessive, controlling, toxic, deep-seated issues, male toxicity. That's 4 different ways she'd describe me having a feeling about something, and I thought about the very basic thing at the center of it. I had said, multiple times in plain language, this thing hurts. Not, I forbid you from doing this. Not, you're not allowed to have friends. Just, this specific dynamic. When I'm standing there and I watch it, I don't feel okay. And every single time that came back around to something being wrong with me for having the feeling in the first place. And now she'd told me she doesn't belong to anyone. And I believed her. Not sarcastically. I actually believed she meant it. She'd just described herself to me very clearly. And I thought about whether I wanted to argue with that description. I didn't. If she doesn't belong to anyone, then she doesn't belong to me. And I'm going to start acting like that's true, because it is true. She just told me. I'm not going to keep trying to have a relationship with someone who's told me in plain terms that's not what's happening. Fell asleep eventually. She was up before me, making coffee in the kitchen like nothing had happened, handed me a mug, asked what I wanted to do with the day, and I said I wasn't sure, probably just some stuff around the place. Normal conversation. But I'd made a decision somewhere between midnight and that cup of coffee. I wasn't going to make a speech about it. I was just going to act on what she'd told me. And the first thing I noticed was how quiet the change was. I didn't turn cold or hostile. I didn't start ignoring her. We still talked and spent time together and did things, but the texture of it was different from my end. The small physical habits I'd had, the ones that belonged to a relationship, those just stopped. Not dramatically, just quietly. stopped coming up behind her in the kitchen, stopped reaching for her hand when we were walking somewhere, stopped being the one who initiated contact in those small ways. She didn't notice immediately, or she noticed but thought it was a mood thing and it would pass. The other thing I started doing was treating my schedule like it was just mine again. Like if a friend texted and said, "What are you doing this weekend?" I'd just make the plan without checking if Maya and I had something. Not to be difficult, just because I'd stopped treating our time as automatically shared. That one she noticed faster. She said something like, "I thought we were hanging out this weekend." I said I didn't know we had plans. She said she'd assumed we'd spend some of it together. I said I already had plans. She went quiet for a moment. I didn't push it further. There was another moment a few days later where she called me while I was out with my friends. I picked up, said hi, asked if everything was okay. She said, "Yeah, just wanted to talk." I said I was out with people, said I'd call her tomorrow. Before that, I would have stepped outside and stayed on the phone for half an hour. That time I just said I'd call tomorrow and meant it. She said okay, and that was that. None of this felt satisfying to me. I want to be clear about that too. It wasn't like I was enjoying withdrawing. It just felt like the only honest thing to do, given what she'd told me about herself. In my head, nothing about this was a power move or a game. It was just that she'd told me something true about herself, and I was responding to that truthfully. If she doesn't belong to me, then I don't get to assume her weekend. If she's not my girlfriend in the way she described, then I don't act like she is. It's very simple when you strip out everything else. A few days after that, my friend reached out about a party at his place. Big enough thing, lots of people, the following weekend. I said I'd come. And I said I'd probably bring Maya, not as some kind of setup, just because that was still how things looked on the surface. We were still spending time together. I was still in contact with her. To anyone looking at us, nothing had obviously changed. So it made sense to bring her along. She seemed happy to come when I mentioned it, genuinely, like she'd been waiting to be included in something. I registered that. We got ready at my place and drove over together. Party was already going when we arrived. Good energy, music, people spread across the apartment and the little outdoor area. I knew a solid chunk of the people there. Maya knew a few. Grabbed drinks, did the initial round of hellos. Maya was in a good mood, talking easily, the version of herself that I'd originally liked. And part of me registered that. Part of me thought about how this could have just been a normal night if things had been different. But I wasn't there for a normal night in the way she thought I was. I was there as someone who'd accepted what she told him. And the first moment came maybe 15 or 20 minutes in. One of my friends, someone I'd known for years, came over to talk, and he hadn't met Maya before. He said, "Hey man, who's this?" And I said, "This is Maya. She's a friend of mine." No pause, no loaded emphasis, just said it. Maya's expression did something in that half second. The smile was already going, and it kind of paused. She recovered fast, said hi, extended her hand, totally socially normal. But I'd seen the pause. The conversation moved on to something else. I stayed in it for a few minutes, and then drifted to another group. The night kept moving the way parties do. I talked to a bunch of people, got another drink, ended up in a long conversation about something completely unrelated to any of this. Maya was doing her own thing around the party. She's good at that. But every time someone new came into my orbit and asked how we knew each other, I said the same thing. She's a friend of mine. Or just, Maya, we run in the same circles. At one point, I was standing in a small group, and she came over and joined it. Someone in the group who didn't know either of us very well asked directly if we were together. And I said, "No, we're friends." She put her hand on my arm at that point. Just let it rest there. I didn't pull away dramatically. I just sort of shifted naturally in the conversation, and the hand came off on its own. Kept talking. I could feel her watching me at the edge of my vision. A bit later, we ended up near each other by the drinks for a moment. She said quietly, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You keep saying we're just friends." I said, "Yeah." She waited. I said, "You told me you don't belong to anyone, so I'm not going to go around introducing you as my girlfriend, if that's not what you want to be called." She started to say something. Someone came over to us, and the conversation opened up, and we both pivoted to that. And that was kind of the pattern for the rest of the night. She tried to get me alone a couple of times. I stayed in the social flow of the party, not running away from her, just not manufacturing the private moment she was looking for. Her friends who were there, a couple she'd brought, had clearly noticed something was off between us. I saw them checking in with her at points during the night. Little whispered exchanges, one of them glancing over at me once with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Maya handled it well socially. She's sharp enough not to make a scene at a party. She kept talking to people, kept smiling, kept being herself. But there was a quietness to her by the time the night wound down that hadn't been there at the start. We said goodbye to people and headed out, walked down to the street, just us on the sidewalk. And she turned to face me. She'd been holding something in for hours at that point. She said, "Are you going to tell me what tonight was about?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said I kept introducing her as my friend. I said, "Yeah, I thought that's what you wanted." She said that's not what she meant, and she thinks I know that. I thought about it for a real second. Then I said, "Okay, help me understand what you did mean." She said she meant she's an independent person with her own identity, that she doesn't want to be treated like an extension of me, like a possession on display. I said I understand that. I said I'm not trying to display her as anything. I'm responding to what she told me. She said I was taking things out of context. I said I wasn't sure that was right. Said both the context of that night and the context of the party seemed like they'd fall under the same basic idea. If she doesn't belong to me, then telling people she does would be inaccurate. She said that's not how relationships work. I said I know, which is why I was wondering if we still had one. She went quiet for a second. Then she said I was being manipulative, that the whole thing, the party, the way I'd introduced her, all of it, was calculated to hurt her or punish her for what she'd said. I thought about whether she was right. I actually considered it, and I said, "I don't think I was trying to punish you. I said I took what you said seriously, and I acted on it. Those are different things." She said she'd been reading about this, that using someone's words against them, twisting the literal meaning to make them feel bad, was a documented manipulation tactic. I said okay. I said, but I hadn't done anything to her. I'd just stopped acting like her boyfriend. She said that doing something to her was exactly what that was. I said I wasn't sure how stepping back from something I'd been asked to let go of counted as me doing something. She didn't have a fast answer. It wasn't that I was trying to win a debate. I was just following the thread, honestly. After a moment, I said, "I think we want different things." She asked what that meant. I said I want someone who, when I say something hurts, takes that as information and responds to it, not as evidence that I have toxic ideas or deep-seated issues. I want to be with someone who's actually in a relationship with me, not someone who keeps the definition of that open depending on the context. She said I was giving up over one argument. I said it wasn't one argument. I said I'd raised this same thing multiple times. Said every time I had, I'd come out of it being described as possessive, controlling, toxic, and now manipulative. Said at some point I have to look at the pattern and ask myself what it means. Said I'd been honest with myself about whether I was being unreasonable, and I didn't think I was. I thought I was a person who wanted to feel like he was actually with someone, not a person who monitored his girlfriend or tried to isolate her, just someone who wanted the basic thing of mattering. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she could hear that she'd hurt me, said she was sorry for that, said she hadn't thought about some of what I was saying and she wanted the chance to. And I believe she meant it, genuinely. The apology was real. I said thank you. Then I said, I think we should stop. She said, don't do this. Said this didn't have to be the ending, that we could work through it. Said she'd go to couples therapy if I wanted, be willing to have longer conversations about all of it. Said she was willing to change things on her end. And I stood there and I thought about it. For a real moment, I thought about what that would look like. Sitting somewhere across from a neutral third party, trying to explain that the issue wasn't jealousy or possessiveness. That the issue was that I'd said something hurts, and I kept being told I'm the problem for having said it. And I could already see how that conversation would be framed. I just didn't have the energy left to fight my way through a frame that wasn't mine to begin with. I said I appreciate the offer, but I don't think more talking changes the core of it. I said we see this stuff differently in a way that I don't think is going to shift. And that's not either of our fault. It's just not a match. I meant that genuinely. It wasn't some cold, calculated line to end the conversation cleanly. I actually thought we were just wrong for each other at a pretty basic level, and staying in it longer wouldn't change that. It would just cost more. She said she loved me, and that was genuinely hard to hear. I didn't say it back, not to be cruel. I just wasn't willing to say something I wasn't sure was still true. I said, take care of yourself, Maya. And I walked to my car, didn't look back. I'm not saying that for effect. I just didn't. Drove home, sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with the engine off. Not crying, not having a moment, just sitting. I think I was half expecting to feel worse than I did. Like some kind of relief guilt where you feel bad about not feeling worse. But it was mostly just quiet. There was a particular quiet to it, like something that had been producing a low hum for months had just been switched off. Went upstairs, fed my cat, got into bed. She texted me that night, a long one. I read the whole thing. She said she'd been sitting with the conversation and she thought she'd been unfair to me. Said she could see that she'd been dismissing what I was saying every time I brought it up. Said she'd framed it as me being controlling when actually I was trying to communicate something and she'd never let it land. Said she was sorry for that and she wanted to try again. I read it twice. And I'll say this, it was more self-aware than I'd expected. It wasn't a defensive text. It wasn't blame shifting. It was someone actually looking at themselves. I appreciated that. But here's the thing I kept coming back to. When she was comfortable, when she thought she had the ground, I was toxic and possessive and controlling. And now that the ground had shifted, she could see things differently. And I didn't know what that said about who I'd be next time she felt comfortable again. I didn't want to find out. I texted her back the next day. Not immediately, not after leaving her hanging for a week either, just the following day. Kept it short. Said I'd read what she sent, and I was glad she'd taken the time to think about it. Said I genuinely wished her well, but getting back together wasn't the right call for me. She replied asking if we could talk on the phone. I said I didn't think more talking would change anything for me, and after that, I stopped responding. Not cruelly, not abruptly. I'd said what I had to say. There wasn't anything left that I needed to add. We had mutual friends, so I knew a bit about what happened after. Not because I was tracking it, just because things come back to you through a social group when you've been close to someone. She was pretty upset for a while from what I heard. Told her friends that I'd done something psychological to her at the party. I don't know the exact version she gave them. Wasn't there for those conversations. One of her friends sent me a message at some point. Not friendly. I read it, didn't respond, I understood it. They only had her version, and she had her version, and neither of those is going to look flattering to me. That's fine. I wasn't going to start a back and forth with someone else's friend, about a relationship they saw from the outside. There was no version of that conversation that helps anyone. So I just let it be. The mutual friends were a little awkward for a stretch. That's just how it goes. People who are close to both sides of something end up navigating it, however they navigate it. One of my closer friends said he'd heard her side of things, and he wanted to hear mine if I wanted to share it. I gave him the short version. He didn't say much, just nodded, said it sounded complicated, which was probably the right thing to say. I didn't need anyone to pick a side. I wasn't trying to win anything. After a while, it settled back to normal. Most of those friendships held. The ones that didn't weren't ones I was that close to anyway. I don't have a dramatic epilogue here. That's just how it ended. I'm telling this because enough time has passed that it's just a thing that happened and not a thing that stings. I've dated since then. Nothing I'm going to get into here. Just noting that I didn't go become some guy who hates women or decides relationships are a trap. I just became more honest about what I actually need from one, and more willing to read it when someone shows me clearly what they think of my needs. That sounds harsh, but it isn't meant to be. It's actually a kinder way to operate. Instead of spending another year trying to fit into a frame that doesn't fit you, you just accept the information and move on. And I've thought about it enough to have some clarity on what it was. I don't think she's a bad person. I want to be clear about that. I think she genuinely believed the things she said. She had a framework she'd built up, probably through reading and conversations and experiences I wasn't part of. And that framework told her that what I was doing fit a pattern of control and toxicity. The problem is that frameworks built on general patterns don't always fit the specific person in front of you, and she'd applied hers before she'd really tested it against who I actually was. The framework wasn't built around me specifically. It was built around a general type, and she applied it when anything started to resemble that type. And I couldn't tell her something hurt without that immediately becoming evidence of the pattern. That's a loop you can't break from inside a relationship. I tried. Calmly, multiple times, different ways. The answer was always some version of the same thing. So I'm not angry about how it ended. The way it ended was pretty much the only way it could have ended honestly. What I took from it isn't some grand lesson about feminism or relationships or any of that. It's just something small and practical. People tell you who they are in the small moments, not the big dramatic ones, and how they respond when you say something hurt. Whether that information lands with them or whether it gets reinterpreted as a character flaw, and whether they can hold space for your discomfort without immediately making it about their framework. I didn't know that as clearly before as I did after. So in some way it was useful, even though useful isn't really how it felt at the time. And that's the whole thing. Nothing insane happened. No screaming, no plates thrown, no dramatic third party. Just two people who wanted different things, and one of them finally stopped pretending otherwise. The last real thing I'll say is this. She got exactly what she asked for that night outside my friend's apartment. I took her words seriously, and I acted on them. Turns out that wasn't actually what she wanted, and I don't mean that as a dig at her. I mean it as a thing that's genuinely worth understanding if you're a person who dates. What people say and what people want are sometimes two different things, and you can't always know which is which until you treat one like the truth. I treated hers like the truth. That's the story. MFW. She told me she doesn't belong to anyone. MFW, I believed her. MFW. So did she, until I agreed.